Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast, where we are dedicated to the art of listening and authentic conversation. We challenge our audience to listen actively and intentionally for the purpose of self-awareness, understanding, personal transformation, and ultimately social impact. I am your host, Anita Russell, and it's my pleasure to get a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hi there, I'm Mavis Bauman.
Hello, I'm Gail Hunter.
So let's just dive right in. The topic of our conversation today is organizational leadership. And more specifically, we're going to talk about the power of leadership and organizational DNA. And so if you're hearing us for the first time, let me just give you a little bit of background on this series that we've been engaged in for quite a few episodes, actually. And the series is entitled the Sankofa Generational Leadership Continuum. And that is defined as a through line running from historical leaders of the past to contemporary leaders of the present to those who will emerge as future leaders. Melding together historical and contemporary reality, this through line inspires resistance, activism, art, literature, ethnography, and research, all designed to fuel transformation and social impact. So in this particular conversation, we take a deep look into the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Everybody's familiar with the Kellogg company. I'm sure everybody can probably walk in their closet right now and pull out a box of cereal or something that's related to the Kellogg company. But what many people may not know is the incredible work that they do on the foundation side of their organization. And the foundation's priority statement says this: embedded within all we do are commitments to advancing racial equity and racial healing, to developing leaders, and to engaging communities in solving their own problems. So when I hear those words, it resonates with me on so many different levels. The idea of equity, as an example, or racial healing, but also this idea of developing leaders and engaging in a community. And that idea in particular of developing leaders is part of what we're talking about here. We're talking about the Sankofa Leadership Continuum. So just to give you a little bit more in terms of what it is they do, the Kellogg Foundation's priorities are actually listed as racial equity and healing, community engagement, and leadership. So just to give you a little bit of insight in where they're coming from a racial equity and healing perspective, back in 2010, I believe it was, yes, 2010, they launched the America Healing. And it was a groundbreaking national initiative that supported communities in healing from the effects of racism and transforming the systems and structures that limit opportunity for children and families. So right away, you hear in these words echoing a major commitment to racial equity and healing, in particular for children and families. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that a little bit later as we get deeper into the conversation. So the America Healing Initiative led to a set of practices for racial healing, creating a network of skilled racial healing practitioners. So just let that sink in. Just think about how long it's been since people have been engaged in anti-racism work and things along those lines. But to think about this American company who back in 2010 launched this initiative, and one of the things that they presented in this initiative is this network of skilled racial healing practitioners. So I know, Gail, when you hear that really resonates with you, this idea of these racial healing practitioners who initiate and lead racial healing in communities. That is so powerful to me. And this work continues as part of all of the grants that they do, that the foundation makes in community-led processes of truth, racial healing, and transformation. So this framework for truth, racial healing, and transformation actually emerged from engagement, wisdom, and contributions of 176 community leaders throughout the United States. So again, just let that sink in. You're involving leadership. We're talking about organizations, organizational DNA. We're talking about leadership development within the context of a healing America through racial healing, racial equity, and healing. So that's really, really powerful. It's very powerful. So going a little bit further, and then we'll open it up for a little bit of a discussion with Mavis and Gail. But achieving racial equity through the Kellogg Foundation lens means that a person's identity does not determine how they are treated, nor does it predict life outcomes. Racial equity requires both systems transformation and racial healing. Then there's the acknowledging the truth that race has been used to sustain a false hierarchy of human values that favor some racial groups over others, for example, privileging whiteness, and determines access to resources and opportunities. So going a little bit further, racial healing makes it possible to acknowledge and speak the truth about past wrongs created by individual and systemic racism, and to address present-day consequences for people, communities, and institutions. Then there's the Community Leadership Network with the Center for Creative Leadership. Now, I know the Center for Creative Leadership. I happen to be an on-call facilitator for the Center for Creative Leadership. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about this organization, and the work that I'm able to do with them is this idea of leadership development, but also looking at it through the lens of racial equity and healing. So that's really, really powerful to see the Kellogg company, the Kellogg Foundation, align with the Center for Creative Leadership in equipping leaders with the knowledge and the skills to bridge the divides in our society and build a more equitable future for all. So just, again, I keep saying that, let those words sink in. That's very powerful. The work that they do is powerful. So Mavis and Gail, your comments, or how does this information resonate with the two of you?
Well, I'll just say that, first of all, the whole idea of community leaders that are specifically, or that's called skilled racial healing practitioners, really strikes me, because this is such an important skill, a unique skill. I think a lot of us would like to think that if we read a book about racial matters, we can help others heal from racial wounds, and that's just not true. So the idea of 176 community leaders throughout the US is really exciting. We got to get some of those people on our show. I'm excited about that, and I love the idea of that we, let's see, the person's identity does not determine life outcomes or predict life outcomes. we want to infer that on people all the time. Well, this person grew up in a bad neighborhood or a poor household, therefore this person is only going to go this far. Kellogg is really standing up in the face of that. So I love that. The whole idea of leadership on racial healing is our zone. Yeah, it sounds great.
Absolutely. So Gail, I'd actually like you to comment a little bit more about that racial healing practitioners as well, from your perspective as a therapist and healer.
Well, I am really excited that they have been doing this program, and that is what every healer or therapist needs in their background somewhere, is to take a course of that, to really be able to practice from that place. I think I've always had that orientation, but not everybody does, and so I am really impressed with what the work that they've done. And a lot of the resources are free. Now, they only gave out to so many communities as far as the grants and the training when this started taking place, but they projected that they were going to reach more than 289 million people, to the people that they've trained, in order to go back into the communities, which is incredible, right?
Wow.
So to say that one person or two people or three, whatever the number may be, has the ability to make an impact on a large number of groups of people, everybody has the ability to do that, right?
Yes.
And anybody can access their information and read about what they're doing and how they're training people. I think it's incredible. And every therapist needs to take that.
Yeah.
And it,
Yeah.
Gail, of conversations that we've had in the past about trauma-informed care when it comes to dealing with the effects of racism. So if you could comment a little bit about that, that would be awesome.
One of the things from OMA, the nonprofit that I run, we have a youth program that is anti-racist, and it's also trauma-informed care. And this goes across the board for anybody that's coming into that program. But we also view that as a way of approaching anybody, that we all have had different, quote, traumas in our lifetime. They may have been small, they may have been big, or may have been multiple. But to be able to have that conscious awareness when you meet somebody or you're working with somebody, to know, instead of why do they do that, to just ask that simple question of what happened to you, right? What went on in your life that caused this behavior for this morning or throughout the last 2 years, or whatever the specifics may be. But to really have that conscious awareness that trauma affects us just as just as racism does. And racism is a form of trauma. It is one of the greatest forms of trauma. And that we all have to begin to realize that and look at that truth and start to work with it and changing it.
Absolutely, because we've often in the past had conversations about racism being a disruptor of health and wellness as it relates to the idea of this generational trauma and things along those lines. So I think this is actually a good segue into the portion that you wanted to talk about, Gail, anyway, from that community engagement, kind of leapfrogging from the work that the Kellogg Foundation actually does. And then how does that resonate with you in terms of some of the work that you actually do through your own foundation in terms of community engagement?
Well, they have these interconnected priorities. You listed the priorities, which are thriving children, working families, and equitable communities. And because everyone wants the community to be vibrant, engaged, and equitable, right? And so what's interesting is that I started OMA, we got the nonprofit status, the 501c3 in 2013. And so we're kind of paralleling what obviously they were doing at a much larger scale. And so, but it's really helpful for me to recognize that this is going on in many, many places, because this kind of work has to be able to reach so many people everywhere. And the work that I think we're doing here and what we're going to continue to do is going to be pretty intense and pretty amazing as it continues to unfold. So OMA, our mission was through, I'm going to quote it because I won't remember it, but it's through experiential education and clinical resources. OMA provides all individuals opportunities to explore and honor one's journey in healing and wellness of mind, body, and spirit. And so that means across the board, from infancy on up to geriatric, we and whatever the cultural background is, whatever the color of your skin is, it doesn't matter. Our basis of our mission was to be open to all that and provide the programs that we provide to everyone at an affordable rate. or for free. And so consequently, we're not making a whole lot of money, but we are providing an incredible amount of experiential programs for kids and adults. And I'm just grateful to be a part of that. You know, my vision really began as a desire to really participate at a deeper level in changing the path of racism and changing the path of being able to help others heal. And I remember I had a woman that was probably about 40, and she was a Black woman, and she had 6 kids, was a single parent, was finishing up her college degree, and was going to go on and get her master's. I mean, if you can imagine, and she did not have very much money, but she had so much resiliency, and she was determined to be able to go in and continue in this path to help herself and her own children. But more than that, she wanted to serve the people in her community. She wanted to provide therapy for people in the community. And she did. She eventually did create that. What I started thinking was, you know, I have all these amazing tools to help people work with traumas, right? That from EMDR and brain spotting to energy healing, all these different things. I can't imagine what would happen if everyone had access to somebody that could help them work at those deeper levels from kids on up, right? How that might transform our world, and not just our internal world, but our relationships, which then can affect every relationship that we have with everyone at a global level too. And so I thought, well, maybe I could think about something. And so this vision came, and we got this holistic healing wellness center that would have youth programs, would have programs for adults, would have educational programs, wellness programs, fitness, I mean, all kind of different things that I can visualize a lot. Don't have the money to create it all yet, but we're working on it. So I wanted to just share with you the Art in the Garden program is a program for youth from about 3 to probably about 14. We have some teens. We have about 12 teens in the program this summer. Over 50% of the slots for people in the summer program, at least, are given towards people that are below the poverty level or extremely low income. And we have other people that have money that they can pay for the care. But we're at about 55 to 60% BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so we're trying to keep that mission going. But what we do in Art in the Garden, it really, it just supports all our programs and how this impacts childhood adversity and trauma and health and learning. We also use intentionally the trauma-informed and anti-racist and LGBTQIA+, and we're very welcoming, culturally respectful and responsive, and very joy-centered. There's some kids that come that are high on the spectrum. There's some kids that come that have been kicked out of other programs. But what happens, because it's in this garden in the city that is behind about 5 or 6 townhouses or row houses, and there's this huge half block or block that's been turned into this amazing garden. And these kids are in this program in the garden. And so they get to experience what it really feels like to be next to nature, what it feels like to be interactive. They also have collaborative people coming in with drumming, and there's the Sankofa Village that comes in and offers drumming. We've had glassmakers from Pittsburgh Glass, and we provide them with meals, and that's for free. They have a breakfast and they have a lunch and snacks. And then we have an after camp program too for kids that need to stay there to be safe and be taken care of until parents can get them. So we really try to work collaboratively with everyone in the community. The East End of Pittsburgh originally had mostly been probably a BIPOC neighborhood, and there's some infiltration of some more wealthier people that have been redoing some places, but where this garden is, it's still pretty honest to its origins. And so we're really excited about what happened. We had over 150 kids that wanted to come into the program. Unfortunately, we need another set, and we need another garden in order to add more kids. Maybe someday we'll be able to. But the other thing we offer trauma-informed training for different other programs and businesses. We do workshops in mind, body, and spirit categories, and we highlight practitioners that are local and national and international. We do retreats. We do a spring and a fall retreat. We do a program called You Are Not Alone, and that's virtual. And so it's for survivors of trauma, of any kind of trauma. And we have a panel discussion of survivors that of some form of trauma in their past, and we discuss different topics. It might be discussing how do you find joy after you've experienced trauma? to what are the different defenses that we tend to go through, or what are the effects of what happens. So there's a wide variety of different topics that we've covered, and that meets once a month, and anybody can come. And we do this podcast, right? We're sponsoring it, part of it, and so we look at healing at many different levels, and what I have to stress the most, and I can't tell you, when I went to the Art in the Garden at their last day of camp, there's maybe a 8 or 9 or 10-year-old little girl that came up to me, and she was full of energy, and she was Hispanic, and she and she grabbed my hand, and she was showing me this and she was taking me here, and it was just such a heart-opening experience, right? To see that she felt so comfortable there, and as all the other kids I could see did, even the teenagers were kind of standing around talking, and then you'd see them going up one kid and up another kid. So I'm really glad that we are on a parallel track to certainly what Kellogg is doing, and hopefully at some point we can actually make more of a direct connection with them. But I'm honored to have these programs and to say that we're surviving.
Yes, yes, and I'm equally honored to be able to say that I've actually worked in the art.
Yes, you have, yeah.
As a matter of fact, that's the place.
Teens.
That's the place where I learned that plants, the sounds of plants can be translated into music.
Music of the plants. That's right.
Music of the, and so when I think about what Kellogg is doing, it's just kind of creating these safe spaces, creating these creative spaces where the color of your skin and your background, how much money you have, all of that is irrelevant.
Right.
The whole entire focus with them, as well as with your organization, Gail, is for the kids to thrive.
Right. And we offer like a healing circle, and I know Kellogg does that too. They train that, and restorative justice circles. I mean, it's really teaching these kids how to thrive. You're right. And how to really relate to the world in a very different way, and move beyond the racism and the poverty.
Yeah. So I always think for those people out there who are a little bit cynical when it comes to things like fighting racism and all of that, these are the places where you need to go and really see the not only the impact on the kids that we're serving, but also the adults who are giving, working, and pouring into these young people just as a function of who they are as a human, right? And
That's
so
right.
I love being in Art in the Garden. I missed it this past summer because I had some going on. When my grandson came, the big little one, when he stayed with me the summer before, he came and joined in the teen program at Art in the Garden. So it's a little gem, it's this little grassroots gem that is growing right in the heart of the East Liberty community in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it really is amazing.
I want to know, since I was recently in Pittsburgh, why I did not get to see the garden.
Oh, I didn't think about taking. Well, you just gotta have to come back.
I didn't think about asking. Yes, I've got to come back. That just sounds so wonderful. And like you say, this neutral environment for people of all kinds to interact and to become familiar with nature.
Well, they're learning how to respect nature, and they're learning how to respect each other. I mean, it really is. It goes hand in hand. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, you're doing wonderful things, Gail. Wonderful things. And it starts with a dream like you have.
That's right. Just a vision. That's right.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Mavis.
I'm just going to say it is thoroughly echoed in what the Kellogg Foundation is doing. And, I always think about how these things don't make it to the news. I don't recall hearing about the Kellogg Foundation. They probably got advertisements or sponsorships on, PBS or something, but not to this level. And when you think about all of us, the individuals, the small organizations and large organizations joining hands, there's a lot of power to move society in the direction it should go.
Oh, I know.
That's exciting stuff. Yeah.
It's one of the other things that kind of I can relate to from reading the information about Kellogg and this whole thing with the network of the trauma or the racial healing practitioners and the fact that they touched all of these people, it reminds me when we went to South Africa. We went to South Africa with a training program to teach women how to do breast self-examinations. And by the time we started on Monday, by the time we got to Friday, our classes were growing and growing and growing simply by word of mouth. And that was extremely powerful. So by the time we left, we had touched the lives through that train-the-trainer model of almost 400 people, going to this village and that village, talking to these people and those people, training this group and training that group. That's
just
what
speak.
Yeah,
just speak. It's incredible.
Exactly. And one of the very gratifying things for me, Mavis, I don't remember if you recall the last time when we talked with Pungasili, and she was saying how the impact of we did, and
10 years later,
is still being felt. That's so powerful, right?
It's very powerful.
It really is. Yeah.
And anyone can get involved.
Yeah,
anyone can really ask and get involved in that way.
Absolutely. Because the organizations are out there, the community-based individuals and groups and all of that, they're there. But people have to take their blinders off, or sometimes it's more than a blinder, it's like a whole veil. Take that whole veil off and really begin to see what is happening in the world around you. Because there's so much that is going on. And I am totally and completely convinced that that arc, remember we talked about that inflection point arc, that arc is in the direction of equity.
Yes.
I truly believe that.
Yeah.
Believe that. It might not be, tomorrow that we see the full effects, but it'll be interesting.
It's going to be a tomorrow though.
Yeah, exactly. But it'll be interesting to see like how the Cairo question plays out. So by the time Cairo like 10 years old or 12 years old, where we will be in all of this activity and all of these conversations. So it is time for us to take a short break. And then when we come back, we're going to dig into some of the experiences that Mavis has had from that community engagement perspective and how it kind of reflects what the Kellogg Foundation is actually doing. So we're going to go to break and then we'll be back shortly. So welcome back to Inflection Point Podcast. We are currently engaged in a conversation on the power of leadership and organizational DNA, and we are specifically highlighting the Kellogg Foundation and its organizational DNA. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Mavis, and she's going to share some of her reflections on what we've been learning about the Kellogg Foundation and their work, and then kind of align that with some of the work that she's done as well.
Good. Okay. Thanks, Anita. I remember having an argument with a teacher of mine when I was in 7th grade. And the question he asked was, what is the best cure? And the answer he gave was prevention. And I kept saying, how can you use prevention to cure something that's already happened? And we went back and forth about that. But that argument came to mind today, just one sentence from a teacher in 7th grade, as I looked at what the Kellogg Foundation is doing. It seems that prevention is really an underlying concept for them as well. With respect to community organization, the Kellogg's Foundation is seriously focused on investing in children. To quote them, they say, children are at the heart of everything we do. And I just love that idea, because so many of us are engaged in activities, even this podcast since the beginning, of talking to adults who are already, kind of convinced of certain beliefs. have not had the advantages that others have had. And when we think about children are in a position to just learn everything brand new. Their minds are constantly working. So they say our goal is lasting and transformational change for children. They work towards achieving strong outcomes for children by connecting with families that have needs, whether it's home, in the home, childcare setting, at school, at work, or in their communities. And Anita was right that they follow this. It's not a top-down approach. It's a train the trainer approach. It's raising up community leaders and supporting them in addressing those local needs, which I have heard forever, even in international work. Once you find someone who's addressing a problem, that's where to place your investment, not in the problems that you may see as an outsider. So they have a program in the foundation called Every Child Thrives. And I love their phrase. They say, we're standing up for babies. Babies can't stand up for themselves. Well, that was pretty cute. They want to take advantage of optimizing a child's health and potential much earlier, well before they are in school, because our brains grow the fastest between the ages of 0 and 3. And, sometimes, you see children that are not in the best of the environments, or have parents that are distraught and not resorting to the best of guidance at the time. I just heard a parent yelling in a store, and I think about how that wounds the child. The parent may be dealing with financial problems, work problems, relationship problems, all of those. Gail knows so much more about this, but they affect how the brain forms and maps itself, what the child can begin to think it itself can accomplish. I thought this was an interesting statistic. The U.S. Chamber Foundation finds that the nation's child care crisis for infants and toddlers costs businesses $3 billion in revenue annually due to employee absenteeism as a result of child care breakdowns. And we know how expensive childcare can be, certainly for a person who's making barely above minimum wage, or when one of the children gets sick. It's just devastating. So they point out that childcare cannot be at the whims of the market, where they only charge what parents can afford. If childcare facilities do that, then they can't get the level of talent and support they need to take care of those little ones. So for a family's ability to work, it's so critical to the overall economy. They need strong local early care and education programs for the children to enter the workforce later on and stay employed. The pandemic really slammed these families with children in childcare facilities. It says that over 16,000, this is all from the Kellogg website, by the way, which is so rich in information, but over 16,000 centers permanently closed due to financial hardships and lack of staff. And I'm wondering how many families that impacted. Both the families of the people that worked in the child care facilities, and let's say it impacted at least, a parent or two, siblings, and so on, when these child care centers closed. So there is just a real mismatch between available slots in many communities and what families actually need. I also was recalling the movie with Diane Keaton, where she is trying to get her baby into the absolute best school in New York City. So she's showing pictures of, continents and objects to a baby. This is like way off the charts. We're talking about food security, physical security for kids. We're talking about healthcare early on. So this is really all of the basics. And Kellogg works hard, in a lobbying sense. They work to help federal and state policymakers understand and prioritize critical needs of infants and toddlers and their families. They want to make sure the potential of every baby is a national priority. So they have been working with families to schedule time for them to speak directly to Congress about their situations. You can imagine how much our elected officials know about this kind of strife. Not much. Their salary is pretty much guaranteed once they've been elected, and they just have access to all kinds of other support because their finances are in different situations. So I thought that was very powerful to have people come in and tell them their stories. You can imagine how that would guide legislation if they hear and really listen to those lived experiences like we were talking earlier. The policy recommendations that they focus on are paid leave for parents, childcare support, early Head Start, family support. They specifically mention trauma responsive policies to keep families intact. That sounds like a big one. Families break up with this kind of tension. Infant and early childhood mental health. This is what takes root in very, very early in life, in this 0 to 3 years of age. Economic security. An example of economic security would include the child tax credit, which has been a proven tool to reduce child poverty and support families. So I just wanted to reinforce that Kellogg the foundation is working with different groups of people, through funding grants themselves for specific goals, or giving grants to organizations who have goals that align with theirs, as opposed to going in themselves to try and solve a problem. They're finding those local leaders that can do it. One of the stories they tell on the website is about a retiree who notices, I think it's in his small town, that it's a food desert. So learning what he learned through working with Kellogg and seeing what their foundation does, established an online food supply for people in this community so they could get healthy food. He identified an armory building that was not being used very often, and then people could come even daily and pick up the food that they had ordered from stores nearby. So, if they didn't have transportation, this foundation that the retirees started, they would deliver food to those families. So, in terms of generational leadership, even, the employees are taking on that role. These foundations are taking on that role. And you can see that all of those efforts are really making an impact. I relate to this pretty well because of the foundation that I've started in. It's actually a nonprofit for the benefit of genocide survivors in Rwanda. In a country like Rwanda, post-genocide, there's just so much need that it's overwhelming. And there are so many kids who have grown up without their parents. Their parents were killed. They've lost their sense of family. There were no adults available to train them how to be, how to eat, how to work, the basics that we take for granted often. So my nonprofit called Seed a Better Life focuses on filling bellies, first of all, making sure that kids have enough to eat, and then sending them to school and making sure that their bellies are full when they go to school so that they have the energy to learn. We had one child in particular that was passing out. We were paying her tuition, but we didn't know she was so hungry at first. And so we started supporting her meals at home, and that made all the difference for her. I believe her name was Jessica. So, I just I just want to encourage anyone listening here that one person can do something. I always told myself I can do one thing. I can send one person to a doctor. I can buy one bag of food, and that can make a difference for that person. And on an ongoing basis, because if you're a student of international relations or conflict, you know that people that have nothing, have no education, do not have enough food, come to the point where they have nothing to lose. And they can be talked in to doing some pretty violent things. During the genocide, people who were hired basically to kill were promised food. They were promised meat if they went out and killed their neighbors. That was enough to have them under control. So we want to make sure that these little ones, we have a lot of, we're supporting a lot of kids in primary school now, that they really have a chance to learn. So any questions, ladies, on what I've raised up here about we are standing up for babies?
So maybe is one thing you did not mention is the organization that you originally started working with in Rwanda, which was called Generations Impact. So if you could talk about that from the standpoint of the Sankofa Leadership Continuum and, you know, this work of investing in young people today, because they will be our future emergent leaders tomorrow.
Yes. You want me to go into a little bit of that now? Because I know we might go further into it in the future, but I'm happy to describe it now. I started my organization really because of a relationship that I formed with a woman in Rwanda who had been asked by the local mayor to help with some genocide survivors. These genocide survivors were calling her in the night saying how hungry they were. They had nothing but a roof over their heads supplied by the government. And this woman, her name is Deborah Kugwisagaya, had started her own organization called Generations Impact. And she chose that name one night when she was praying because she, after having yet another call from someone who was hungry, said, how can I keep these kids from ever having to endure something like this again? How can we keep this country from ever falling to such a violent event? And so she and I, you know, our hearts were just kind of matched up. And so she continues her organization, as I said, called Generations Impact. And mine is separately incorporated 501c3 here in the States. And we work together daily. Just today, we sent some funds for a particular young man whose father was injured, so he couldn't go to college. So the family doesn't have any hope of getting, you know, substantial work or income in the family. He's now going to be going to the university. And I said to Deborah, I said, it's just such a joy to help our kids. And she said she got confused by that comment. So she sent me more kids who were desperate for food. And I thought, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'm sending like $108 for food for just some small needs for several people. One of our genocide survivors, Anita, you probably met, Patrick, just had twins. Wow. He needs food for those twins.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. And it is a joy. And I can only imagine the joy and the gratification that the folks at Kellogg, you know, reap for themselves. I mean, this is the best work in the world to do. I just love it. So I think that speaks to your question, right, Anita?
Yes, I just thought it was important that you mentioned the name Generations Impact, because it's
of course
what we're talking about from this generation perspective and all of that wasn't just something that I kind of pulled out of the air. It's there. People are doing this type of work and not just doing it here in the United States. They're doing it in so many other places around the world. Like I think about even myself with, I have a Compassion International child that I support,
Exactly.
World Visions and all of that.
Mhm.
It's a joy to me when I get a letter from them saying, oh, it was my birthday, or, I hope you're having a good day. And these are like little kids, just little kids. As a matter of fact, the one little girl that I'm supporting in that particular program, they allow children to pick their sponsors. So we had to like take a picture, and then they sent all of the pictures over to the kids, and the kids, they showed them on a video with like all of these pictures of all of these sponsors just hanging, and each kid went and picked their own.
Oh,
Yeah, so it was,
that's a flip. I love that.
yeah, it
Love that.
was pretty amazing. And then the other one that I support, she and I have the same birthday, April 18th. So it's kind of cool when they make those little connections like that.
Yes.
So, it goes a little bit more than just me sending, $40 a month or something like that. Support somebody. There's a little bit more of a connection. That little girl chose me to be her,
Yes.
right? So that's pretty darn cool.
Yes.
That
Yes.
is- so I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking of one more scene that happened when I think this was when you were with me in Rwanda, Anita. We had asked Deborah what the kids really wanted and what they could use. And she said they really need Bibles. And so we went and bought about 25 Bibles in their native language. And these kids were so proud. And they asked me to sign these Bibles. And I just am holding on to the belief that one of those Bibles will show up somewhere on a leader's desk, whether it's a corporate leader like Kellogg, or a government leader, or in Parliament. I'm just believing for that. And the kids sense that, right? They know when you're believing in them. They carry that with them.
So we are definitely winding down. And one of the things that I wanted to do in this portion is to call out the websites, because we mentioned a number of websites. Specifically, I want people to go visit the W.K. Kellogg Foundation website, and that is WKKF.org. So if you go to WKKF.org, you can read about their priorities, you can read about their DNA, you can read about all of their programs related to America healing, racial equity and healing, children thriving, and all of that. Because if you've never been on their website ever, you will be amazed at the work that this organization does. So I applaud them as our organizational leader today for this episode, that we are tipping our hats to the Kellogg Foundation.
Yes, well done.
Absolutely. So I need you all to call out your websites again as well, because you do important work too.
Yes, go ahead, Gail. OMA is www.omatspittsburgh.org.
Yes, and my website is SEED, SEED, abetterlife.org. And you'll see our story, our mission, photos of our kids there. I would love it if you would visit and donate if you can. We're small, but we're doing things, and it matters. And I just want to encourage, again, everybody who's listening, that you too really are a generational leader. Everyone that you speak to, every young person is listening to you. And think about what you say and the actions you take.
Absolutely, Mavis. Thank you so much for saying that, because that is one of the strong messages that we, in doing this work, want to convey to people, that you as an individual have a role to play in dismantling racism, eradicating racism, ushering in a place of equity for all. We all can play a role in doing that. And it doesn't matter how big your role is, how small your role is, as long as you are doing something. And we just mentioned 3 organizations that you could either stick your your talons into if you wanted
Yes.
to lock in with something. The OMA organization, Seed a Better Life, and the Kellogg Foundation. 3 phenomenal organizations that are doing the work. So what I'd like to do is just kind of close out with a specific quote. And this quote comes from the Kellogg Foundation. It's a dream as old and as important as our democracy itself. A country where we all embrace our common humanity and children of every race and ethnicity have equal opportunities to thrive. Children, their health, well-being, and lifelong opportunities are at the center of all we undertake. So if you're investing in children, you're investing in emergent leaders, you're investing in the future. And I applaud the Kellogg Foundation. I applaud Mavis for what you're doing with Seed a Better Life. I applaud Gail with what you're doing with OMA Pittsburgh. And I am just the person who has been graced with the opportunity to work with both of these organizations. So I'm so incredibly grateful for that. So all of this, I always end with the Cairo question. All of this relates back to the Cairo question. As always, the final question is, what will you do to ensure that children have the right to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which they were born? Because you can play a role the same way that we can play a role. Get out there, find out what is going on in your own community, and lock arms with somebody and grow. So I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Inflection Point podcast. We will see you the next time on Transformation Talk Radio. We are here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time, and we will see you at the next episode. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.